Welcome to Chapter 14 of Traditions and Encounters, the expansive reel of Islam. So this chapter really talks about Islam and its foundations in the Middle East. So Islam, as you may recall from the previous videos on Judaism and Christianity, was the third of the Abrahamic religions. So these three religions all have ties stemming back from the Prophet Abraham. So what happened was there was this prophet named Muhammad, and he had this message. So he lived in this Arabian peninsula, which was mostly desert. So this is like modern day Saudi Arabia. And he was a part of these nomadic Bedouin people who were organized into families and clan groups. And these people were important because they were really the long-distance traders in the middle between China and India in the east and Persia and Byzantium out west. So Muhammad was born into a Mecca merchant family in around 570 AD, and he had a difficult early life, but things turned around when he married a wealthy widow named Khadija. So this was his wife, make sure to remember that. And as a result of this, he became a merchant as well at age 30 and was exposed to the various faiths of the Middle East because it was sort of the focal point, and there were a lot of religions at that time. And by the time he was 40, he had this spiritual transformation. And basically, it was revealed that he thought there was only one true God, Allah, so the God, the same one of Judaism and Christianity. And he believed that Allah would soon bring judgment onto the world. And it says that the Archangel Gabriel delivered these messages to Muhammad. So once this was complete, there was this book, this recitation called the Quran, and this is really the holy book of Islam. So the followers compiled Muhammad's revelations together into like this work of poetry, and it became the definitive authority on Islam. Sooner after that, Muhammad had this migration to Medina, and basically he was just spreading his teachings. But the problem was it offended other believers, especially the ruling elite of Mecca, and so as a result he had to migrate to Medina. And these were attacks on the greedy, really offended the wealthy merchants at the time, who of course were very wealthy from the Silk Road, and it also attacked the idolatry of the shrines. One was the black rock at the Kaaba, which will come into play later. So, as a result of this, there was the Hijra, which was when Muhammad and his followers fled to Medina. So Medina is this other city in Saudi Arabia that's a shortish distance from Mecca, and he did this in 622 AD. And this move, known as the Hijra, was the starting point of the Islamic calendar. So make sure you remember that because it's really important. And there was also the Ummah, which was sort of like the cohesive community of Muslims in Medina, sort of like the culture over there. And so the early Muslims or followers of Islam, they really held Hebrew scripture and the New Testament in high esteem. So these were taken from Judaism and Christianity as well. And sooner after, Muhammad returned to Mecca. Once he returned to Mecca from Medina, he conquered Mecca, and he imposed a government that was dedicated to Allah. And through this, he destroyed pagan shrines and built mosques, which is the Muslim place of worship. But the Kaaba, as we talked earlier, was not destroyed. It actually became the site of pilgrimage in 632, and it's sort of like this really important place in Islam today. So there's also the 5 pillars of Islam, and these are like obligations taught by Muhammad. Basically, all Muslims have to follow these 5 pillars. And there's also the Islamic law, which is the Sharia, and this was inspired by the Quran. It was basically the law in which Muslims aim to live by. So let's talk a bit more about the history of Islam. So Islam really started to expand through early caliphs in the Umayyad dynasty. So the caliph, the first one was Abu Bakr, and he served as the caliph, really just the leader or the deputy of early Islam. And through him, there was the rising of 2 groups. One was called the Shia and one was called the Sunni. The Shia were really the people, the small minority group who supported that the caliph be the descendants of Ali. However, there were Sunnis, which are the majority today, and they were really traditionalists. They really just accepted the legitimacy of the early caliphs, and they really felt that the caliph did not have to come from Ali's line. So there was lots of ongoing conflict between these two sects, and soon after there was the Umayyad dynasty, and the Umayyads established a capital at Damascus, Syria, and they ruled the Dar al-Islam, which is really like the realm of Islam they ruled in. And this was run by an Arabian military aristocracy, and among things they did was they levied a jizya, which was like a head tax on those who did not convert to Islam. Even the non-Arab converts had to pay this. But ultimately, the Umayyad declined due to the discontent and conquering of the resisting Shia. And soon after that was the Abbasid dynasty. So the Abbasid dynasty was really the golden age of Islam, if you will. Basically, to form this dynasty, they allied with the Shias and other non-Arab Muslims, and they beat out the Umayyad in 750. Soon after was the Abbasid dynasty, and this was the second one. There was no special favor to the Arab military aristocracy anymore and no more conquering, but the empire still grew. And they really relied on heavy Persian techniques that came before them in the Middle East, and they moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, so that's Persia or Iran today. They also did some revolutionary stuff like appointing governors to subdivide and rule the provinces. And there were also the Qadis, who were like the religious judges who ruled local places. Ultimately, though, the Abbasids ran into problems as well, and they soon lost power as well. But the Umayyads and Abbasids were really the two main empires that really helped to spread Islam a lot. And the third part is economy and society. So, of the early Islamic world, there were new crops, agricultural experimentation, and lots of urban growth, so growth of cities. And there were lots of spreads of new foods and industrial crops, and there was also this new textile industry, which is like cloths, that started to boom in the Middle East. And another industry was the paper manufacturing. So paper was invented in China, but the Muslims really started to make it really widespread and popular and a lot cheaper. And there was also overland trade, so as said before, trade revived on the Silk Roads and it grew. And there were also roads for military and administrative purposes. Also important were the camels and caravans, so this is really important right here. This was the main way to travel. Basically, overland travel, it was always by camel caravan because it's in the desert. And the caravanserais from Persia we see again. There was also big maritime trade because the Muslims were big traders on the seas. For example, they used Persian techniques and lots of other things. So for example, they borrowed the compass from the Chinese. They borrowed the Latin sail, so that's the triangular sail from the Southeast Asians and Malacca and Indian mariners, and they also borrowed the astrolabe from the Hellenistic mariners, and we'll see more about this influence a bit later. They also had big banks, so the concept of money was pretty revolutionary at this time when bartering was the main deal. And there was also this important exclave called Al-Andalus, with its capital city Cordoba. So this was really Islamic Spain. It's this small area in Spain that was conquered by Muslim Berbers, and they really just had a rich culture there away from everything else. So about the Quran, it really helped women because it enhanced security of women, but at the same time, the Quran and Sharia law really reinforced male domination. So even though women got a lot of rights at this time, patriarchy still reigned supreme, like the rest of world history. And then there's also the veiling of women. So this concept seems kind of foreign to us, but it was actually really common in the Arabian desert for women to be veiled, whether they were followers of Islam or not. And in Mesopotamia and Persia, it was really just a cultural custom adopted by the early Muslims. And today it's the hijab and basically the headscarf, and it just really started to seep into this Islam culture, so syncretism. So the Quran and Sharia were the main sources to formulate moral guidelines for these people. These were the cultural exchanges. There was also education, so there was lots of education at this time. There was also this sect called the Sufis, and these were Islamic mystics. They were the most effective missionaries because they really helped syncretize with other people. They were known for their passionate singing or dancing, so like sometimes in Turkey you can see these. And these Sufis led ascetic and holy lives, and they won the respect of the people they interacted with. And they were also really tolerant of other peoples, so this really helped to promote their message as well. Also, there was the cultural pilgrimage of the Hajj, which was basically going to visit the Kaaba because it became like the symbol of Islamic cultural unity and is in Saudi Arabia every year. And pilgrims help to spread Islamic beliefs and values, and it's said that one of the 5 pillars is that all Muslims, if they're able to, should visit the Kaaba and make the Hajj once in their lifetime. So finally, we look at some cultural traditions of Persia, India, and Greece and see how they influence Islam. So Persia, there were the literary works and the administrative techniques that were carried over into Islam. After all, they were really just neighbors. And kingship of the wise, benevolent kings. Indians, so the Indians really created the Hindi numerals, which the Europeans later called the Arabic numerals. And also, there were Indian influences in algebra and trigonometry. So the Muslims were really credited with this crazy math called algebra and trigonometry at the time. And right now we use it so much, so it's really important. There's also the Greek influences, so Muslim philosophers really liked the Greek, Plato and Aristotle, and their thinking. And basically just even Hellenistic things seeped into Islam at this time. So this has been Chapter 14, A New Society, basically talking about the expansiveness and the new creation of Islam. Thanks so much for watching, and hope to see you in the next one.